Yo, I'm Bandit. Today, I'm here to discuss and delve into a game that I've been absolutely obsessed with lately. Which you probably already know what I'm talking about, judging from not only the title, but also from my most recent uploads to this channel. So, without further ado, let's get into
the Lords of Tantrazz.
Before I get into this, I want to stress one thing. If you ever want to play this game completely blind, with no spoilers to the plot, please be warned that this video will have spoilers. I know it seems silly to give a spoiler warning for a game from 1996, but you never know. Now, let's get into this. So what is the Lords of Tantrazz? Well, the Lords of Tantrazz is a sci-fi adventure game that was made by Kane Roberts and Dark Planet Interactive, and released by Atlantean Interactive Games on November 9, 1996 for Windows and Mac computers. You play as Secret Agent Veronica Callahan as she takes on an investigation/seek and rescue mission. But as she delves deeper into her mission, the more she realizes there is something much more sinister going on behind the scenes. The gameplay itself consists mostly of various puzzles, and this game is very story-driven as the cutscenes are pretty prominent throughout the game. The cutscenes are also heavily inspired by comic book artists, and most of the art is actually done by Kane Roberts. Though later on in the game, we actually do get some notable comic book artists doing some artwork, with Dave Brewer in Chapter 5 and the beginning of Chapter 6, and then Greg Bluzniak in the rest of Chapter 6. The music in this game is also done by Kane, whether it's him singing or playing on them, or him writing them. Another notable thing is the voice acting in this game. For one, Kane does some voice acting in this game, but the biggest name associated with this game is Alice Cooper, as he also has a voice acting role in this game. Now, I'm sure at least one person is wondering, how the fuck did this guy get Alice Cooper, a rock and roll legend, on a game that in no way has an Alice Cooper-based storyline? Well, that's because Kane Roberts ain't exactly a nobody. In fact, Kane is a former guitarist for Alice Cooper. He co-wrote the entirety of both the Constrictor and Raise Your Fist and Yell albums, and had a big hand in Alice's comeback as a result. And while he left the band after the tour for Raise Your Fist and Yell, he would also co-write and play on the song Bed of Nails on the Trash album. He also had a solo career, with his first album releasing in 1987, and his second album, Saints and Sinners, would be released in 1991. And the latter album had a pretty well-known hit with Does Anybody Really Fall in Love Anymore? Which, by the way, that song is a funny contrast with how people knew of him at the time, but I'll save that for another video. If that isn't a good enough explanation for you though, I've got an alternate one for you. He's the big beefy guitar man with the gun guitar that literally shot fire. You know, rock and roll Rambo? Yeah, that's Kane. With that in mind, it might seem a bit funny that this big muscle man made a video game. After all, it feels pretty left field at first. Hell, even I was completely stunned when I first learned about it. But like I mentioned with Does Anybody Really Fall in Love Anymore, he's got a knack for throwing you a curveball or two. Which happens to include the fact that he's a gamer. Like, seriously, to this day, he still loves video game stuff. But that alone doesn't answer the question of why he made a video game in the first place. After the release of the Saints and Sinners album, despite having a solid hit, the timing wasn't particularly the best. The music atmosphere changed fast, with the rise of grunge and all. But it was less the music that was around and more the music business that Kane didn't like. Which, I mean, that's fair. You just want to get your stuff out there, make what you want to make, but the business could put a damper on that. So, Kane ultimately would take a hiatus from the music industry, and being the creative force he is, he turned his sights to other creative outlets, specifically graphic design, and as you can already guess, video games. Wait, games? Games plural? Yeah, so it turns out, while the Lords of Tantrazz is the only game Kane wound up releasing, it wasn't the only one he worked on. Now, it is known that Tantrazz was planned to have a sequel called The Eye of the Witch, which was to be, and I quote, the shattering conclusion to the Tantrazz storyline. But apparently, there were 3 projects Kane worked on. One of them was the Lords of Tantrazz, another would probably be The Eye of the Witch, and the third one is totally unknown. No title, no plot. As for what Kane was going for with this game and its storyline, there's a bit more to it than him just wanting to make a video game. And the main reason I'm even mentioning this is because I asked Kane about this at one point, and he answered. Basically, Kane wanted to make a sci-fi story with a woman as the main protagonist, not just having her on the sidelines. So, he wrote the story and characters around this. Whether it was the strained relationship between her and another character that I'll mention later when I go into the characters themselves, or the villains of this game, Kane made sure that the female protagonist was the focus. So props to Kane for that, because it's actually really cool. Now, I want to talk about the music in this game real quick. After all, this game's roots are really entrenched in music. Kane Roberts, Alice Cooper, other members of the Alice Cooper camp, namely Michael Wagner and Arthur Funaro, better known as Devlin 7 or Johnny Dime, who was in the band at the same time Kane was, and even a future bandmate who was part of at least one of Kane's later music projects after Tantras, Karen Ponyboy Bernstein. They all show off just how entangled this game is with the music world. Hell, Kane and Arthur both did the score for this game, and I'm sure Michael Wagner had some sort of input. Let's start with the theme song of this game, Reckless. Written by Kane Roberts, Mike Slammer, and Jimmy Tavis, this song actually made its debut in this game. Then it later appeared on Kane's 1999 album, Under a Wild Sky, with his band Phoenix Down, and then appeared in the 2001 movie Rockstar with Jennifer Aniston and Mark Wahlberg. So this is probably the most widespread thing that's come from the Lords of Tantrazz. Side note, at first I wasn't sure whether or not this game was written specifically for Tantrazz. I mean, the lyrics don't exactly reference the storyline at all. Plus, Kane does have a tendency to reuse songs from time to time. So I wound up also asking him about this. And he said, no, Reckless wasn't written purely for Tantrazz. So I was spot on. I guess Kane just had it sitting around and thought, this would be really cool to put into Tantrazz. Kane reusing songs, as I mentioned, isn't exactly an uncommon occurrence. So there's a few I can actually name off really quick. Waiting for You, a song that predates his Alice Cooper days, appears as a track on Unsung Radio, and then appeared on the 2012 reissue of Saints and Sinners, being re-recorded. His song Wrong, which originally appeared on Unsung Radio, wound up also being on The New Normal. And he re-recorded 2 songs off of Saints and Sinners for Under a Wild Sky, Rebel Heart and You Always Want It. There was a song called Funny With Ya from Flesh FX, which was a band Kane was involved with. Also appeared on a planned tracklist for an unreleased album known as Touched. And, of course, as I mentioned, Reckless appearing on Tantras and then being added to Under a Wild Sky. Actually, in a similar sort of topic, a couple of the songs in this game do have some interesting similarities to other songs that Kane wrote or co-wrote. There's a song called Walking on Shadows, written by Kane, and immediately that stood out to me with the title alone. After all, Kane later released a song on Under a Wild Sky with the same title, and there are lyric similarities towards the end as the song fades out. In fact, let me actually put in the music stuff so you guys can just hear it here. There are also lyric similarities to another one of Kane's songs that would wind up appearing on Unsung Radio, One Step to Heaven. There's also music in Chapter 6 that sounds a lot like Alice Cooper's Roses on White Lace. And by that, I mean... it's pretty much the exact same. So there's a lot of music that ties into this game one way or another. Okay, now that I've gotten the music out of the way, let's talk about the gameplay in a bit more depth. As I said before, this game consists of various puzzles. There's a part of the game where you briefly do some combat, and you adventure around to find stuff like items and puzzles by clicking around. So it's a bit of a point-and-click game, which is specifically to make the immersion of the gameplay deeper by not relying on keyboard involvement. And that's not me making shit up, that's specifically said in the game. You also have an inventory that will have items that are beneficial to your playthrough, such as info cards that you can read for clues. It's not too complicated. Tantraz's gameplay mechanics are fairly easy to grasp, and it's not a game that takes forever to beat. Hell, my no commentary walkthrough is less than 50 minutes long, so it's pretty much how long the game is if you don't goof off. But despite the game not being particularly difficult or long, there is one little issue that I ran into on my first playthrough of the game. A puzzle guide or walkthrough is not really optional. Or at least, I would not recommend playing this game without one. Now, sure, for most cases, this really isn't an issue. Some puzzles can kind of be guessed through trial and error, and sometimes the game will tell you, or at least give you a hint as to what you're meant to do. And plus, the game literally comes with the guide in the box. I would know, I literally got a sealed copy of this game and it has everything it should. However, that guide is not easy to obtain. Rather, it wasn't when I first played it. When I first played Tantras, I literally just downloaded a ROM online so I could play, as I called it, the Kane game. Hell, on my first video involving Tantras, I'm playing it on an emulator. So I didn't get a guide with it. And if I wanted a guide, I would have to watch someone else play through the game, because no one bothered to upload the puzzle guide online at the time of me playing it. So there are a fair few puzzles that would take you forever without it. And it's not just because of a progressive difficulty increase as you go through the game. No, the first puzzle that is an annoyance without a guide is actually in Chapter 1. There is a point where you wind up having to enter in a specific button combination to progress through the story, and at no point do you get a hint for the combination you're meant to enter. So if you don't have a guide, you kinda have to just try and guess until you happen to get the combo that you're meant to hit. It isn't exactly hard, it's just really annoying to have to do multiple combinations of the same 3 buttons that you're meant to hit without knowing what exactly you're meant to do. By the way, it's Access Viewport. You're welcome. This isn't the only puzzle that has this issue though. Chapter 3 has a puzzle where you're meant to hit a group of 7 buttons to make it say, Hammer Shield Security Systems Disabled. But the buttons segment the sentence really weirdly.
Hammer, shield, secured, ISIS, Tantras, able. Hammer, shield, secured, ISIS, Tantras, able.
In concept, sure, it's cool. But trying to figure that out without a walkthrough? Yeah, good luck with that. I know some of my friends watching this are going to be wondering about a particular puzzle that gave me a lot of trouble, since I mentioned having difficulty with puzzles without a guide. So I'll just mention it here. The puzzle in question that I struggled with the most is the very first puzzle in the game, which is a reflex puzzle. You hit buttons as they light up, and if you miss more than 3, you have to do it again. It's not something you need the guide for. Me not having the guide did not make this any easier or harder. It's more on whether or not you're good at puzzles like that, which I'm not. Need I mention the Bandit can't do puzzles video?
You're not quite ready for this
Fucking
mission.
damn it.
I'm sorry to say.
Great, I get to go home.
Fuck. This is ridiculous. Yeah, that happened. Also, a bit of a rant incoming here, since I mentioned that I had to emulate this game and download a ROM online initially. Before anyone, for whatever reason, tries to come at me with the emulation bad, wah wah, buy the game and support the creator thing, I want you to know that this game is not officially made anymore. It hasn't been officially made for years. It's abandonware. It isn't distributed anymore, it isn't manufactured anymore, and it's damn near impossible to find a physical copy for sale anyways. And it's not that it's expensive, but rather, this game had a really limited release. Finding a copy at all is not easy. And even if I did buy a physical copy, which I did wind up doing as I mentioned, Kane Roberts doesn't get a cent of it. If you buy it, Kane isn't selling it. So even if I wanted to, which trust me, I would have if I could have, I can't support Kane by buying this game. Rant over, let's move on to covering the game itself. So, to start with that, how about we talk about the characters in this game? Really quick though, I want to stress that this is when the spoilers get really heavy. So, if you want to watch a gameplay of this first, or play it yourself without any knowledge of the story, I'd suggest you stop the video here and come back later. And if you want a timestamp to skip to see more of this video, go to the timestamp that comes up on the screen for instructions and advice on how you can actually play the game yourself. First, we have the main character, Veronica Showbon Callahan. Everyone calls her Ronnie, spelled R-O-N-N-I. There is no E. So, I'll just call her Ronnie through the rest of this video. Voiced by Sunny Sheridan, she's an A1A agent under the Swerdlow Omnitech Enterprises, and she is who you play as throughout the game. She is described to be quite beautiful, but don't let that fool you, because she isn't one to be messed with. She's a secret agent for a reason. She has one hell of a backstory. She grew up being thrown around from orphanage to orphanage, and she was a victim of child abuse along with that. She didn't know either of her parents until meeting her mother in adulthood, and by then her mother had become ill because of her alcoholism, so Ronnie had to turn to crime to pay for her mother's hospital bills. One night, however, she and a friend were apprehended during a robbery, and a police officer assaulted Ronnie's friend. Ronnie would step in to try and defend her friend, trying to grab the gun from the officer, but she would accidentally kill him in the struggle. She would be arrested for this and was sentenced with the death penalty. And I need to interject here for a moment. I genuinely did not realize that this was non-exaggeration for dramatic effect. I had to look it up, and sure enough, it can be a life sentence or death penalty for killing a cop. Of course, she would not go through the death penalty, otherwise she wouldn't be the main character. A man named Manfred Swerdlow would intervene, and he would offer her a deal. If she didn't want to go through with the death penalty, she could join his agency. Of course, Ronnie accepted his offer, under one condition. Her mother's hospital bills would be paid for, and that she would be taken care of. And with that, the deal was set. She went through intense training for 2 years, and when it came to her first mission, she did it with ease, showing that she was a perfect candidate for the Swerdlow Omnitech Enterprises. However, this isn't something she's particularly fond of. The Swerdlow Omnitech Enterprises' connections to the government is a harsh contrast to her rebellious nature. With her mother's recent passing on top of this, she has grown tired of her secret agent life. Next up, we have Manfred Swerdlow, aka my favorite character in this game. I had to mention it, I'm sorry. But with that out of the way. Voiced by Kane Roberts, Manfred is the CEO of his own company, the aforementioned Swerdlow Omnitech Enterprises. He is also the director of the Covert Strike Force Training Operations, also known simply as the CSTO. An enigmatic man, Manfred has had a major impact on the espionage and high-tech weaponry industries, with his many inventions that were both prolific and innovative. Hilariously, his first invention was something called a voice stress analyzer, which the government deemed to be illegal. The reason for that was, and I quote directly from the game here, "Misinformation is the foundation on which politics operates." Despite this, Manfred still made a major impact on the covert surveillance and information retrieval worlds. At some point, his company would wind up being tied to the US government, causing his inventions to go down a darker route. Though it proved to be beneficial with the research, high-tech weaponry, and surveillance devices this connection would provide. It also provided Manfred with the power necessary to intervene in Ronnie's legal punishment. The Black Ops part of the main menu, which is where all his character info is at, is made to look like a message to Manfred and his archive files. The message that Manfred receives prompts him to investigate a rival organization known as Dunnington Research. Also, towards the end of the game, he's actually revealed to be Ronnie's father, something that is a wild plot twist. This is why he saved Ronnie from the death penalty, and after Ronnie's mother's death, he decided to keep an eye on her to make sure she was safe. Talk about a strained relationship. Although, I need to briefly mention this because this is something a lot of people point out when they do play this game, and if I don't cover it, someone out there is going to mention it either way. So, this revelation does make some lines from the first 2 chapters awkward.
I've missed you too. It was difficult at first, not seeing you and having to pretend I didn't have feelings for you. But getting my life back on track has kept me pretty busy.
Well, Ronnie, you know in order for this operation to function efficiently, a certain, how shall I say, emotional distance must be maintained.
You still have the ability to make my emotions seem so small. No need to worry that little organic database of yours, Manfred. I'm over you now. If Swerdlow's done his job, I should be about 1.5 miles from the ridge. Doing his job is about all I can rely on him for. That heartless bastard. To think I once felt something for him.
I mentioned this in my playthrough even. But as a result, people tend to jump to some rather weird conclusions to say the least. More specifically, they assume that Ronnie and Manfred had some sort of romantic relationship in the past. I don't see where they get this. Maybe they need to listen to the wording a bit better, because in no shape or form is that actually implied. Hell, the awkward line stuff is something that isn't prominent in the plot, and isn't even brought up past chapter 2 of the game. The best thing I could compare it to in another media is the situation in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Battle Tendency with Lisa and Joseph Joestar. You know, the bathtub scene. That one. Yeah, I know, odd comparison, but it's pretty much identical. In both cases, the scenes in question aren't even mentioned later on in their stories. And yes, okay, get your JoJo reference freakouts out of your system. JoJo, oh my god. Okay, let's move on to the rest of the characters. Since I mentioned the Dunnington Research Corporation, we're moving on to the president of that company. Angus Meldrick Dunnington III. Fancy name, I know. Voiced by Arthur Funaro, Angus has had a life of decadence, being born into a wealthy family that controlled the manufacturing of a small, yet essential latrine part. With this wealth, Angus grew up with the mindset that every man has his price, buying and cheating his way through Oxford, and coercing a biopsychochemist known as Dr. Priestley Crane to join his company. And as a further display of his wealth, he bought an entire fucking island for his company's base. As for what the Dunnington Research Corporation does, they deal in the chemical area of warfare. Mind-altering drugs, brainwashing techniques, you name it, they probably did it. Unlike the Swerdlow Omnitech Enterprises, Dunnington Research failed to develop partnerships with the US government superpowers. So, instead, they became freelance dealers in unfair war practices. The main plot of the game revolves around Angus's latest plans, and more specifically the mystery behind them. Is it nuclear weaponry? Do they intend on dumping deadly chemicals into the oceans of the world? Angus wouldn't divulge this, not bothering to answer any contact attempts. Instead, he would leave his second-in-command, Claudia Horn, to deal with that. Claudia Horn is Angus's right-hand man. Or woman, in this case. Voiced by Karen Bernstein, Claudia is a merciless, sadistic woman, being dubbed the Titanium Lady by those working under the Dunnington Research Corporation. She has her hands in every aspect of Angus's work and dealings, and is even said to likely be pulling the strings behind it all, something that Angus would never admit to. Claudia handles the business of the Dunnington Research Corporation, whether it is interviewing anyone who wants to do business with the company, or interrogating suspected spies. And when it comes to these interrogations, she takes immense joy in them. She has a room called the kitchen where she grills possible spies. Get it? Grills them? Good one, Kane. Her joy in this line of work has earned her the nickname of the Inquisitor, and she delights in using the chemicals that the company provides her to do so. Whether it's modern chemicals or ancient sciences, she will use them with joy on these spies. And whether she has to use mind-altering drugs or even aphrodisiacs to get her way, she will get her kicks and information in due time. Oddly, her backstory is not as in-depth as the rest of the main four. Even Swordlow's is more extensive, and he's canonically referred to as being an enigmatic, mysterious man. I'm not exactly sure why this is, but I have a bit of a theory that I'll get into later on. Also, fun fact, Claudia is the woman in the intro cinematic of the game. I had to mention that somehow, so there you go. There are a few characters outside of these main four, though it's mostly unnamed background characters. But there is one other character that is prominent throughout the game, as he is the one the seek and rescue part of the mission involves. Jax Kelso doesn't have as extensive of a backstory, as the Black Ops menu does not cover him at all. In fact, we have basically no background on him other than him being part of the good guys. We do at least get a voice actor noted for him in the credits, which is Arthur Funaro. Jax seems to be involved with the Swirlo Omnitech Enterprises in some way, presumably working directly underneath the company, though it isn't properly stated in-game. He's assigned to the same mission Ronnie is, but ultimately needs backup. And, fun fact, like Claudia, Jax is in the intro cinematic of the game. He leaves info cards for you through the game, which provide you with hints, and at one point, one of these info cards is actually required to complete Chapter 4. Through these info cards, though, we ultimately find out that Jax winds up being captured by Dunnington Research. And then after Ronnie gets captured herself, we find out that he died at the hands of Claudia during an interrogation. And while at first you may think this is an off-screen thing, it actually isn't. Remember that intro cinematic? That's you witnessing his demise. Kane didn't pull any punches with that. Which, okay, I promise that wasn't a joke about his physique. I swear. Now, at first, you are led to believe that it is just Angus and Claudia who are the main antagonists of the game. But in truth, there are not one, but two more characters I have to cover. The first of these is this big, monstrous being known as the Sentinel. The big part of Angus's plan to bring about a new order upon Earth, the catalyst that he needed. After stealing data from Swordlow Omnitech Enterprises, he builds an interdimensional gate similar to one Manfred and his company had been working on. Angus brings this beast to Earth, expecting it to follow his commands. But this goes insanely wrong, because the Sentinel was not going to take his orders. As Angus is bragging to Manfred and Ronnie, and telling this beast that he was to be the ruler of this new world, the Sentinel fucking impales him and blasts his face with a point-blank blast from its arm cannon. The big twist has been revealed in the most intense way that you could have imagined. Angus is fucking dead, and you are next in line. Because, unsurprisingly, its sights immediately set on both Manfred and Ronnie, and it also blasts Manfred, prompting Ronnie to take action to take it down by herself. Amazingly, Manfred survives this, and after an emotional moment with Ronnie, he tells her that he must detonate the gate from inside, and that she will have to contact a man named Jonathan Cole of DEFCON 5, as the only way she can get him back from the portal is using the gateway that his company built back at the main headquarters. But before they can go through with this plan, the two of them are greeted by another being coming through the same gateway that the Sentinel had. Enter the Hunger, the true villain of the story, and the role that Alice Cooper himself voices. Despite being a floating red skull, it is an intimidating presence. The Hunger applauds Ronnie for her feat of defeating the Sentinel, a test that many had failed. It reveals that it has been using the Sentinel as a test for someone to prove that they are worthy to be the bearer of the Tantrazian army, and ultimately, the one to help conquer the planet and bring a new order upon it. And, of course, as Ronnie had passed this trial, she was to be the vessel for the Hunger's plans. Manfred comes up with a plan for Ronnie to distract the Hunger, so he could destroy the portal. And, of course, Ronnie does exactly that, letting herself get dangerously close to having the Hunger go through with its plans. But just in the nick of time, Manfred gets into the portal, enraging the Hunger, who proclaims that it will destroy Manfred and then return to finish off Ronnie. Ronnie escapes the base, and the game ends there with a teaser for the sequel I mentioned earlier, The Eye of the Witch. The game leaves you off on that cliffhanger, only for the sequel to not happen, and oh my god. Oh my fucking god! We don't get to see any reunion between Manfred and Ronnie, and to put salt in my wound in particular, you have my favorite character risking his life, and we don't know the result of that. I am just heartbroken that The Eye of the Witch never came out. Fuck! My anguish over the sequel aside, man, what a story! And that plot twist! Yeah, that plot twist. About that. When it comes to this plot twist with the Sentinel and the Hunger being the real big bads rather than Angus and Claudia, it is not a plot twist when the advertising fucking spoils this. Yeah, the advertising, in my opinion, was not done in a good way at all. And before I go on this massive rant, don't get me wrong. I adore this game. The story is fun. The characters are cool. Fuck, I'm probably the biggest fan of it out there, and maybe even the youngest at that. So I have to stress that this is not meant to be like a jab at anyone involved with the game, and especially not Kane. Trust me, I'm smart enough to not try and start shit with Kane fucking Roberts. The man could break me in half like he did to the guitar in Alice Cooper's music video for the song Freedom. But I need to get this off my chest. I get that Alice Cooper voices the big bad in this game, but couldn't that have just been left at featuring Alice Cooper in the advertising? At the very least, the yellow sticker that's on the box does leave it off at featuring the voice of Alice Cooper, but everywhere else, this is not the case. It's one thing to show the big bad on the box, because it's vague enough to where when you see it, you don't know what it is. So once you do see it in the game, you go, oh cool, that's the guy in the box. But when you reveal the plot twist in a press release, you have kind of fucked up with the advertising. Like, I wish I was kidding, but I'm not. The press release says, since dropping off the planet, Kane Roberts has focused his creativity on the world of computer games. He currently has 3 CD-ROMs in production, most notably the Lords of Tantrazz on Atlantean Interactive. A dark and gore-filled sci-fi adventure, it features a dramatic performance by rock and roll's master of the macabre, Alice Cooper, as the voice of the ultimate evil, the Hunger. Release date is set for the 3rd quarter of '96. Are you kidding me? The game hadn't even come out yet, and you throw the biggest spoiler at everybody? What? Are you? Huh? And I know, I see where they were coming from with this approach. Like, it's Alice Cooper, for fuck's sake. One of the biggest names in rock and roll. If you get the chance to use him in advertising, generally, it'll get a fair amount of attention. But the story itself tries to frame this big evil as a mystery, and it just gets totally ruined by the advertising. And again, that yellow sticker on the box that I own leaves it at Alice Cooper's voice is featured in this without spoiling that he voices the big bad. And it could have been done that way throughout all the advertising. And it just wasn't. And also, it's not even just the Hunger that you get spoiled on. No, even the Sentinel is spoiled on the back of the box. Literally, the back of the box shows the Sentinel in its full glory, which wouldn't be as bad if it didn't say this. Join Super Agent Veronica Callahan on a deadly seek and rescue mission. When this dude shows up, all hell breaks loose, and you are the only one who can help her save the world. What? Are you can't... This isn't a joke. You spoil not just one, but both of the plot twist villains. And you put emphasis on it. You emphasized that this is the climax of the game. At least the hunger being on the box is vague. But the Sentinel is just thrown around. Fuck's sake, man. Moving on from my rant there, I want to answer a question that someone's bound to ask. How can you play this game nowadays? It's not an easy task, that's for sure. I'd argue that the easiest way to play this game without issue is playing it on an old computer. This game was built for old machines, and when playing it on modern computers, this is really, really evident. And by that, I mean Windows 10 fucking hates this game. When I first attempted to make the walkthrough that I uploaded here, I tried to play this on Windows 10, because you can run this game on Windows 10, and you could beat Chapter 1 without much issue. But oh boy, good luck playing the whole game on Windows 10 without having to use the cheat code that allows you to just choose whatever chapter you want to play, which by the way is the Z button. Chapters 3 and 4 are not beatable at all, no matter what you try. Chapter 3 will freeze after the connecting puzzle, and Chapter 4 always crashes upon grabbing the info card that is required to pass the chapter. And you could chalk this up to my laptop not being able to handle this game, but really? A game from 1996 being too much for a laptop from 2017? Yeah, I don't think so. If you want to try to run Tantras on a stronger modern machine natively, you can tell me how it goes. If you don't have an old machine, your best bet is doing what I did, using an emulator, also known as a virtual machine. I personally recommend Basilisk 2 for the most part, but it seems to freeze after a puzzle in Chapter 3, which is a bit of an issue. I don't know a better emulator myself, but if anyone is willing to experiment with emulators to find out what the best emulator for Tantras is, let me know. I'll provide a ROM for you if you need it, if it helps any. Just let me know, and I'll gladly do it. Now, this video isn't over yet, as I have just a few more things to cover. There are a couple questions that I have, and I'm sure you asked at least one of these when I mentioned it earlier. What happened to the Eye of the Witch, and what exactly was it gonna be like? Aside from the title and a brief idea of what the plot would be with how Tantraz ended, we don't have anything more to go off of. So, let's get this out of the way. How far did the sequel get before it was scrapped? It got far enough to where I managed to find some artwork that seems to be intended for the sequel, as none of it appears in Tantraz, and it's not that it's unused stuff either. But what else did Kane do before he stopped working on it? What even happened to stop the sequel from happening? Well, it turns out, it isn't much more than the stuff I found. I wound up asking Kane about this, and he said that aside from what I had found, not much had been done for the sequel, and that it had turned into a script. Along with this, judging from some posts Kane has made over the years, it seems that it may have become more of a comic rather than a game at some point in the concept stages. As for the script, I don't have anything that I can share, aside from my own personal theories and ideas. Now, Kane did say to me he'd looked for the script, and that I had even gotten him curious about it, so it seems that not even Kane remembers many specifics from it. Now, if he does find anything from the script and lets me know, I will likely make a video where I talk about the Eye of the Witch and compare my theories and ideas to what Kane actually wrote. So maybe keep an eye out for that. Fingers crossed. But now this is where we delve into uncharted territory. What was done for the sequel? Well, I found some artwork, and even an entire character sheet that is more than likely for a character that would have appeared in The Eye of the Witch. And, like I mentioned, I also have some theories about what the story could have had. It's not like a full-on plot, but some ideas as to possible plot points. So, while looking through online archives of Kane's old site, I found a bunch of artwork. This includes art of characters such as the Sentinel, Jax Kelso, a character who appears briefly in Chapter 4, and then two characters that aren't in the Lords of Tantrazz, but are clearly tied to the storyline. The character from Chapter 4, who is the one who captures Ronnie, actually has a name that we can see from the file name, which is Reb. Whether this is short for something like Rebecca or not is unknown, but we at least get to know her name. As for the two characters who aren't in Tantrazz, well, it's more like three, but whatever. Two of them appear in an image with the file name Cole.jpg. Cole, huh? Say, didn't we hear that name? Jonathan Cole?
You've got to hightail it out of here and and make it back to headquarters, contact Jonathan Cole of the DEFCON 5 Strike Force team. He can tell you how to operate our own interdimensional gate. That's the only way to bring me back.
Yeah, it turns out we can actually see what it looks like. Except there's two characters here. It's not clear whether Cole is the blonde guy here or this red guy, but I'm guessing he's the blonde guy purely because of a theory I'll get into in a moment. I can't help but wonder if the red guy has some sort of ties to the Sentinel. It may be a stretch, sure, but there are similarities here. And by similarities, I mean it's a big scary red monster man with sharp teeth. We don't know what Kane had up his sleeve for these characters, so it's not impossible. And the final character appears in two files, cache-dos.jpg and cache.jpg. In cache-dos, we actually get a full character sheet. So, I'm gonna read it here. Data Wave Profile Systems, Division, DEFCON 5, Subject, Alonzo Callahan. Extreme honors at Neo-Citadel, Butte, Montana. Displayed above average tactical skills in Tibetan theater. Excelled in virtual as well as field excursions. Long-range weapons. Level 7 Mole 938 Operator. Level 8 accuracy with ANSAC Disruptor Cannon, handheld model. Dangerous loyalty to Cole and DEFCON 5 teammates. Displays erratic tendencies when confronted with bureaucratic authority. Dishonorable discharge from Neo-Citadel. See personnel file. Savant level aptitude in combat situations. Now, the first thing that stood out to me was his last name being Callahan. Because, Callahan? The same last name as Ronnie? Because while it's not guaranteed that Cash Alonzo? Fuck it, we're going with Cash. Cash being related to Ronnie isn't exactly confirmed or anything like that. But something tells me that his last name being Callahan is not some coincidence. Hell, he has some similarities to Ronnie as it is, with the whole erratic tendencies with confronted with authority thing. They're both rebellious types. And the comment about his aptitude in combat reminds me of Ronnie being able to tackle her first mission with no issue. Quite a few parallels. Too many for me to comfortably dismiss the shared surname as coincidental. His ties to DEFCON 5 and Jonathan Cole also tell me that he was going to be a major character in the sequel, assuming the DEFCON 5 unit was to be a major part in the Eye of the Witch, considering Manfred specifically tells Ryan to seek them out. Man, this whole character sheet makes me ask so many questions. What exactly was his role going to be in the story? Who would have voiced him? Is he related to Ronnie like I think he is? The only one who could know is Kane, but I'm not sure how much of the story he remembers at this point. As for theory shenanigans, though, I do have one theory as to how the story could have gone. I feel like Claudia would have had a sizable role, and so would have the Reb character I mentioned earlier. Angus is dead, but we don't get any confirmation on whether Claudia is dead or not. And while we could assume she is, that doesn't mean it's true. But maybe, just maybe, we would have gotten more background on Claudia, which could explain why we got nothing about her past in her character sheet in Tantras. And this might be far-fetched, but maybe with her knack for chemicals and the likes of that, and with how she had a hand in every aspect of Dunnington research, somehow she caused whoever that red monster guy was to become that monster? Because I seriously do not think that that red guy always looked that way. Maybe there was some chemical that was meant to have some sort of thing involving the Sentinel made by Dunnington research scientists. Maybe the red guy has some sort of tie with Cash here? I'm mostly thinking this because the hair looks similar, but if my theory about how that red monster came to be is true, perhaps it was Cash who was on the receiving end. Or maybe the red monster guy is Cole and it's Cole who would be on the receiving end, but appearance-wise I think it's more than likely that it'd be Cash. But hey, I don't know, man. I'm just throwing shit at the wall and hoping it sticks. As for Reb, I feel like she would be at Claudia's side once again. After all, Claudia enlisted her to capture Ronnie in the first place, so why wouldn't she bring her on board entirely? And need I point out that she specifically says she's delivering Ronnie to Claudia rather than Angus?
Such a frail thing to have given us so much trouble. I better deliver her to Claudia right away.
I don't think Claudia would just let go of a connection that actually did her job really well. It wasn't Reb's fault that Ronnie escaped. there is no reason for Claudia to just not utilize her connections like that. Now, we don't know much about Reb. She does speak in Tantras, but we don't get a voice actor's credit. And she appears very, very briefly to begin with. Chances are, if she was to be in the Eye of the Witch, we would have seen her character fleshed out more. Plus, this feels like an obvious plot point for the Eye of the Witch, but I'll mention it because it needs to be mentioned. Chances are we would have found out more about what the hell a Tantraz is. Like, okay, I'll be more specific on that. What's the Tantrazian Order? Where the hell did the Hunger come from? Did the Hunger make the Sentinel, or was the Sentinel something that the Hunger found and used to its advantage? There is just no way Kane was going to have the Hunger be completely irrelevant to the sequel, especially if it dominated the advertising of the first game. Kane had some sort of trick up his sleeve here, one that we may never know the full extent of. But that's all just theories. We don't have any sort of reference for the story itself. But at the very least, there is one more thing I do have. Prototype screenshots. On the back of the box for Tantraz, we can see 5 images on the right hand side. A picture of Ronnie in Chapter 3 before the combat puzzle, a picture of an image from Kelso's video message to Manfred, a picture of Kelso in the intro cinematic, and 2 interesting pics. A picture of the inventory menu and a character sheet for Angus. And I have to go over these 2 because when I first saw them, I realized that these were different from what the final game had. The inventory menu is a bit different from the final. The color of the interface is red rather than blue, and only the Cell Star is visible. In the final game, it's blue, and you never have just the Cell Star. From the get-go, you get a few items, which does include the Cell Star. It makes me wonder if you were going to have to pick up one item at a time during Chapter 2, rather than having all the items in the first box immediately be put in your inventory. Now, Angus's character sheet is by far the most interesting of the 2. For one, the general appearance is totally different. It's not the file archive style sheet that we get in the final, and some details are changed. Plus, we get more backstory on Angus. The details that change are his weight and age. His weight went from 210 pounds to 200 pounds, and went from being 38 years old to 42 years old. His hair color is described in a bit more detail, being called red with a white streak in the old character sheet, but gets simplified to just be auburn in the final. We also get the fun fact that he's left-handed. I can understand why this was removed, but I kinda wish this was kept, because I do like little details like that, but that might just be me. As for his eye color, it's not easy to read. RD, at least I think it says RD, I'd assume would refer to his mechanical eye, but the second part looks like either green or brown. If it's brown, this is unchanged in the final sheet, but it's inaccurate to the actual design as he is drawn with green eyes. If it is green, however, this is changed in the final and is more accurate to his design in the game. Whatever the case may be, it doesn't answer why the eye color isn't consistent with the final character sheet. Because in the game, Angus is described with brown eyes as I mentioned, but is drawn with green eyes throughout the whole game. Now, for Angus's additional backstory tidbit, we do get more information on his missing eye. I'll read it here. Telescopic left eye with Obtex retinal injection monocle. Loss of eye result of confrontation with Jonathan Cole of Renegade Strike Force Team, DEFCON 5. Once again, DEFCON 5 and Jonathan Cole come up. And it seems they have history with Angus and his company, which makes the sequel even more interesting, because maybe we could have gotten more info on that ordeal. Ah, I can dream. It's a shame that the Eye of the Witch never got a release. While, sure, Tantras didn't really get popular, and it wasn't a big game, I would love to see the storyline's conclusion. And maybe I'm not the only one who feels this way. But I haven't seen anyone else talk about it, so who knows? Right, so here we are. I believe I've covered everything that I needed to cover, which is a lot more than most people would do. Most people just kinda either look at Tantraz and shrug it off, or if they do look into it, they don't scratch the surface of everything this game is. So, what exactly are my thoughts on this game? I've said it a few times throughout this video, but I'll explain myself more. I love this game. No, it's not out of some sort of pity. No, it's not out of blind worship for anything Kane Roberts or even Alice Cooper does. And no, it's not ironic. My feelings are completely genuine, no matter how dumb some people might think it is. So why? Why exactly do I like this game as much as I do? Well, that's easy. I had fun. Once I got by the issues of playing this on modern hardware, I had a lot of fun playing through this game. And while the gameplay isn't super complicated, sometimes less is more. The story is interesting, and I'm a sucker for sci-fi as it is. But the story really did hit me hard, especially with Ronnie and Manfred's relationship. I still get teary-eyed when I see the cutscene where Manfred is telling Ronnie about why he wasn't there for her in her youth, and how he didn't hesitate to sacrifice himself for her. The amount of world building we have for Tantraz is super fun for me to look into. The connection DEF CON 5 has with Angus, how well explained the circumstances are for stuff like the origins of Manfred and Angus's companies, and how we can fully understand Ronnie's struggles through her life. Hell, even how we get an answer for what the enigmas behind Manfred himself were. And all of this shows that Kane is a creative force to be reckoned with. He made a compelling story. Hell, the fact that he made a video game at all is impressive. When it comes to musicians and video games, it's typically them overseeing it without too much involvement in the actual programming and assets used, aside from maybe their appearances and voices. Maybe they'll have some involvement with the storytelling, which in most cases revolves around them. Which isn't a bad thing, but it's typically how it goes. Maybe they'll make music for the game if pre-existing music isn't used, but the musician himself did not make the game. Kane, however, was thoroughly involved with this, from the music itself to the voice acting to the story itself, and even the art and character designs. All the music at Tantras was original, and aside from Reckless, everything else was written for Tantras. Hell, the story not revolving around Kane himself or even Alice Cooper is something that should be praised if you ask me. Kane made a game with an original storyline, and I don't think this is really appreciated as much as it should be. Say what you will about Tantraz. You can love the game, you can hate it, but you have to give credit where credit is due. Kane Roberts is a versatile man, and it shows. Now, I can safely say I've wrapped this up. I've had a lot of fun making this video, and with all of my Tantraz shenanigans. If you want to see my Tantraz shenanigans, I have a playlist of them here on my channel, and I'm sure I'll upload more at some point. As for future videos here, I'm considering making a video on another obscure Kane Roberts project known as FleshFX. So we'll see how that goes. And one last thing. I want to give a special thank you to Kane himself for not only making the Lords of Tantrazz, but for also answering all of the Tantrazz related questions I've asked him. I cannot thank him enough for that. But without further ado, this has been Nash Bandit, as Kane Roberts would say, rock the fuck on.